India. Shri Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India. Ministry of Personnel, Public Grievances and Pensions, Department of Atomic Energy, Department of Space, all important policy issues and all other portfolios not allocated to any minister. Shri Amit Shah, Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Cooperation. Shri Rajnath Singh, Ministry of Defense. Shri Nitin Jairam Gadkari, Ministry of Road, Transport and Highways. Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Shri Narendra Singh Tomar, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, Ministry of External Affairs. Shri Arjun Munda, Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Srimati Smriti Zubin Irani, Ministry of Women and Child Development. Shri Piyush Goyal, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution and Ministry of Textiles. Shri Dharmendra Pradhan, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. Shri Prahlad Joshi, Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, Ministry of Coal, Ministry of Mines. Shri Narayana Tatu Rane, Ministry of Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. Shri Sarvanand Sonowal, Ministry of Ayurveda, Yoga and Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha and Homeopathy. Shri Mukhtar Abbas Naqvi, Ministry of Minority Affairs. Dr. Birendra Kumar, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. Shri Giriraj Singh, Ministry of Rural Development, Ministry of Panchayat Raj. Shri Jyotir Aditya Scindia, Ministry of Civil Aviation. Shri Ramachandra Prasad Singh, Ministry of Steel. Shri Ashwini Vaishnav, Ministry of Railways, Ministry of Communication, Ministry of Electronics and Ministry of Information Technology. Shri Pasupati Kumar Palas, Ministry of Food Processing Industry. Shri Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, Ministry of Jal Shakti. Shri Kiran Rijiju, Ministry of Law and Justice. Shri Rajkumar Singh, Ministry of Power, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. Shri Hardeep Singh Puri, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Shri Mansukh L. Mandavia, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Ministry of Chemical and Fertilizers. Shri Bhupendra Yadav, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Ministry of Labor and Employment. Dr. Mahendra Nath Pandey, Ministry of Heavy Industries. Shri Purushottam Rupala, Ministry of Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying. Shri G. Kishan Reddy, Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Development of North Eastern Region. Sri Anurag Singh Thakur, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports. Like, subscribe and press all the notification. Sri Rao Inderjit Singh, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, Ministry of Planning. Dr. Jitendra Singh, Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of Earth Science. And Sri Rao Indrajit Singh, Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Dr. Jitendra Singh, Prime Minister Office, Ministry of Personal Public Grievances and Pensions, Department of Atomic Energy, Department of Space. Sri Sripad Yaso Naik, Ministry of Tourism. Sri Hagan Singh Kulaste, Ministry of Steel, Ministry of Rural Development. Sri Prahlad Singh Patel, Ministry of Jal Shakti, Ministry of Food Processing Industries. Sri Ashwini Kumar Chube, Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Sri Arjun Ram Meghwal, Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, Ministry of Culture. General Retired V.K. Singh, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, Ministry of Civil Aviation. Sri Kishan Pal, Ministry of Power, Ministry of Heavy Industries. Sri Danbe Rao Saheb Dada Rao, Ministry of Railways, Ministry of Coal, Ministry of Mines. Sri Ramdas Athwale, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. Sadhvi Niranjan Jyoti, Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution, Ministry of Rural Development. Sri Sanjeev Kumar Balian, Ministry of Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying. Sri Nityananda Rai, Ministry of Home Affairs. Sri Pankaj Chaudhary, Ministry of Finance. Srimati Anupriya Singh Patel, Ministry of Commerce and Industries. Professor S.P. Singh Baghel, Ministry of Law and Justice. Sri Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Susri Shobha Karanlaje, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. Sri Bhanu Pratap Singh Verma, Ministry of Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. Srimati Darshan Vikram Jardos, Ministry of Textiles, Ministry of Railways. Sri V. Muralidharan, Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. Srimati Meenakshi Lekhi, Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Culture. Sri Som Prakash, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Srimati Renuka Singh Saruta, Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Sri Rameshwar Teli, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Ministry of Labour and Employment. Sri Kailash Chaudhary, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. Srimati Annapurna Devi, Ministry of Education. Sri A. Narayanaswamy, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. Sri Kaushal Kishore, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Sri Ajay Bhatt, Ministry of Defence, Ministry of Tourism. Sri B. L. Burma, Ministry of Development of North Eastern Region, Ministry of Cooperation. Sri Ajay Kumar, Ministry of Home Affairs. Sri Devasinha Chauhan, Ministry of Communications. Sri Bhagwant Khuba, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, Sri Kapil Moreshwar Patil, Ministry of Panchayat Raj, Sushri Pramita Bhumik, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Dr. Subhash Sarkar, Ministry of Education, Dr. Bhagwant Kishan Rao Karat, Ministry of Finance, Dr. Rajkumar Ranjan Singh, Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Education, Dr. Bharati Probin Pawar, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Sri Visheshwar Tudu, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Ministry of Jal Shakti, Sri Santanu Thakur, Cabinet Minister, Dr. Manjupara Mohendra Bhai, Ministry of Women and Child, Ministry of Ayurveda, Yoga and Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha and Homeopathy, Ayush, Sri John Bala, Ministry of Minority Affairs, Dr. Murugan, Ministry of Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Sri Nitish Pramanik, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports,